When we retired on that Sunday night, we did so with comparatively easy minds. At least the others did. I did not. We had been looking out for another manifestation since dusk, and when 9 o'clock came and nothing had happened, we had begun to become pessimistic, fearing that we would be roused during the night. But at 9:52 the flute made itself heard, and when the crisis had passed, we went to bed feeling that we could count upon at least 6 hours of peace. Jessie and her mother would be roused in any case when their respective nightmares occurred, but this feature of our troubles, upsetting as it was, somehow seemed to unnerve them far less than did the flute manifestations. In a way, I suppose it was natural. A dream, when all was said and done, was a dream, and no matter how vivid, could not hope to outdo for sheer dread and terror a tangible event experienced when one was fully awake. Jessie, though deaf to the flute and unable to see the apparition, still anticipated the occurrence of the manifestations with nervous dread, a fact that did not fail to register on me. Her mother's tenterhooks resulted from her anxiety on her husband's behalf. Whenever a manifestation occurred, it was always upon her husband that Mrs. Nevinson's attention became focused. It was because of this obsession with her husband, in fact, that she had not, even up to this Sunday night, observed what had been happening to Jessie. I had been the only witness to the girl's strange antics. I was the only one on this Sunday night, therefore, who knew of the horror threatening the girl, and that was why, as I got into my pajamas, I was far from easy in mind. Indeed, I was in a particularly morbid mood. At this point in the terrible adventure, my bones and my flute. I knew that sleep would be impossible for me. So instead of getting into bed, I climbed out of my bedroom window and began to pace about on the veranda with a cigarette for company, little guessing the greater horror in store for me that night. Up and down the veranda I paced. The moon crescent Jessie and I had seen with such startling abruptness 10 nights before at the dining table was now nearly full, and the grassy clearing around the cottage and the billowing walls of jungle that encircled the clearing glimmered with a soft loveliness that, to my poisoned senses, was completely out of keeping with the atmosphere in this cottage. It seemed wrong. The night out there, I told myself, had no right to look so innocent and dreamingly beautiful, when events in the lives of us 4 people were so ugly and troubled. I heard a stirring in Mr. Nevinson's room, and my host appeared at the window.
"What's the matter, young man? Is tonight another of your sleepless nights?"
"It's beginning to look so, sir," I replied. "Nothing like sleep in my eyes, I'm afraid."
"Try one of the hammocks. It proved successful with me 2 nights ago. It's a trifle warmer than usual tonight."
"Yes, that's so. I'll just potter around a bit and see how I feel after a while," I told him. For an instant I was tempted to break my resolve and divulge what I knew about the horror I had been witnessing during the past few days. But I restrained myself. Apart from my desire not to cause him more worry than he already had to bear, I felt that it would be embarrassing for both of us. Imagine having to tell someone, an old and respected friend whom you had known since boyhood, that you had seen his daughter becoming changed into a loathsome fiend, that the sight had made you shudder not only with terror, but with nausea as well. Apart from the fear of hurting him, I dreaded being ridiculed. Spectral fruits and furry demons were absurd enough, but to talk now about Jessie's being possessed of an evil fiend, the thing sounded like the limit in medieval superstition. Mr. Nevinson turned off from the window, and a moment later I heard him get into bed. This was by no means the first night I had paced the veranda through not being able to sleep, so he must have thought nothing of my presence out there. He himself had done it. Mrs. Nevinson too, and Jessie. An hour must have elapsed, and the cottage had fallen into absolute silence, when the sudden desire to move around on the northern section of the veranda took hold of me. I heard the river gurgle secretly as though something in its depth had divined my thoughts. Putting out the cigarette I had just lit, I went round onto the northern section to find rhombuses of dim light on the floor. Light from the 10-watt bulb in the room occupied by Jessie and her mother. Walking silently, I paused near the hammock and looked into the room. Outside, a frog had begun to chirrup. They were both asleep, Mrs. Nevinson on her stomach, Jessie on her right side, her face towards the window. As usual, they had not let down the nets. I could detect nothing strange about them, nothing grotesque or unreal. There were simply two women asleep. One a middle-aged one, with a young-looking face, and the other a girl of 19. Had a stranger stood at this window and gazed in at them lying there, he would have had no reason to associate with them such things as demons and spectral manifestations, stigmata, and recurrent nightmares. I began to ask myself what on earth could have possessed me to want to come round to this side of the cottage to peer in at them. What had I expected to see? I looked about the room, but everything was as I had known it before. It was true that the white enamel dressing table in this dim, shaded light had a ghostly air, looming up in the northwestern corner with a waiting intelligence, the toilet articles on it sparkling dully, like sly eyes on the watch for unknown presences. But this impression I knew how to treat. It was the result of my over-sharpened imagination. I could ignore this, sniff at it. I turned off and got into the hammock, and for the next hour or so tried to induce sleep by staring with wide-open eyes at the roof, this being a trick of mine which sometimes works. The eyes get tired, and after a while the lids have the inclination to sag heavily. Immediately this happens, you force them open again in a wide stare, and go on doing this until at length, from sheer fatigue, you find that you have no more will left to open your eyes again, and soothing blackness descends, or should descend, for it is not always that it proves successful. This was one of the nights when it did not. Too many thoughts kept plaguing me, too many thoughts and fears, and the hammock rope creaked every time I shifted my position. Often, too, I would gaze hard at the dimly visible roof of the veranda, and my whole body would freeze in terror as I thought I could discern a dark moving blob with sprawling legs. It seemed just about to drop on me when I would realize that it was only the flaw in the paintwork, not a spider. Once or twice I heard Jessie and her mother turn over and breathe heavily. Once a firefly darted over the veranda rail in a silent green-white arc and alighted on the hammock rope near my outstretched feet, and instinctively my feet recoiled. I could hear the toes cracking faintly. Another time a sharp rustling sound came from the shrubs that grew near the sawmill, and I sat up stiffly in a jerk and stared out towards the spot, but I heard nothing of it again. The steady high-pitched chirr of insects was the only sound in the moonlit night that seemed entirely free of innuendo, for the steady beat of the petter engine held a metallic threat, as though at any instant it would turn into a fiendish stutter, or a cold, dry cackle of laughter, or a death gargle. The fireflies danced their perpetual dance against the background of silent jungle. The scene of sawmill and trees stared back at me with a knowing and abstruse smile, shifty amid its glimmering loveliness, and I could hear the river. The dankness of the rotting leaves and the vegetable reek of black water came to my senses, A midnight chilliness tingled in the air. I lay back once more, and after a while a soothing restfulness came over me, so that I was in no doubt that at last sleep was near. I tried to resign myself to the feeling, relaxing physically and mentally, but to no avail. I would imagine that I was asleep, but would know that it was only a belief into which I had wishfully lulled myself. Thoughts would continue to weave unending patterns in my head. Now and then Jessie's distorted features drifted fearfully in the blackness behind my closed eyes, and I would sigh and fidget about. Presently, the horror began. I became aware of a musky smell. It was not the river or the jungle. At first I thought it might be a residue of some perfume on a garment in the women's room, but the next instant I knew it could not be so. There was a rankness in it, and this rankness grew stronger. I lay still, frowning up at the roof. I tried to convince myself that it must be my imagination again playing a trick on me, but the conviction refused to take root. The smell persisted. Could it be some kind of incense that one of the men in the logis was burning? No, I felt sure it was not incense. There was an animal quality about it. That goatish reek could not be associated with incense. It baffled me completely. I could not identify the thing no matter how I tried. But I was to see it that night. In the story of My Bones and My Flute.